Ladies and gentlemen, fantastic. Okay, we are on. Good afternoon, folks. A very warm welcome to this high-level panel, The Potential of a Classroom, co-organised by UNICEF and the Romanian Presidency to the European Union. My name is James Elder. I am the head of communication for UNICEF in Eastern and Southern Africa. I'm based in Nairobi, and obviously today I will be your moderator. Ladies and gents, for the next hour and a half, we're going to look at education in mid and low income countries. We're going to ask the questions on can it, and if so, how, become the essential tool for reducing inequality in our world, and mostly what needs to be done to get us there. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, we are at potentially the most pivotal moment in human history when it comes to education and the sheer number of children and young people. Where I work, in Eastern and Southern Africa, we will need another 6 million teachers in the next 10 years if countries are to reach the minimum standard of their neighbours. 6 million teachers in 10 years. This is not 2050, this is not 2100, this is the next 5 to 10 years, folks. Now, a little bit of housekeeping, today's setup. As you can see, I will introduce our distinguished guests in a couple of minutes. Each of them will respond for around 3 minutes to our questions as we get to the core of this subject. Normally I would ask you at this point to turn your phones off, but quite the opposite. Today is turn your phones on and get the app ready. We will do a quiz at some point to test your knowledge. And of course there'll be fantastic prizes, namely honour and glory. And of course, at the end of this, we do want to keep time for you to ask your questions to our panelists. So please, get on the app, send through your questions, and at the end of it, we will ask questions to our panelists. Now, that gives me the perfect segue, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the 6 people behind me. Now, from Romania, I'm delighted to have the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Maria Magdalena Gregori. And from India, it's my honour to introduce Mr. Kailash Satyarthi, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 for his outstanding work as a child rights advocate. I'd like to add that a couple of years ago he led a nationwide march across India demanding stronger legislation in the face of child rape, child sexual abuse. That march covered 19,000 kilometres in 35 days? In 35 days, and they didn't have any of these fancy scooters you see outside or in Brussels. That was simply walking by feet. Now, from Ghana, it's my pleasure to introduce Okosia Prepa. She's been involved with education for a long time in her home country and is one of our EDD young leaders. Sticking with our young panellists from Kenya, very keen to welcome Lucas Odhiambo. Lucas will share stories today of growing up in some of the poorer parts of Nairobi, what that was like and how he's been able to become a foot soldier in getting more children back into the classroom in Kenya. From the private sector, to my left here, Mr. Bernard Yvetot, who is the Vice President of International Strategy of the Orange Group, which many of you will know, a very big global telecom. Who will, of course, tell us about the role of the private sector in ensuring young people are equipped with the skills they need going forward. As I say, possibly the issue of our time. And finally, in the middle, also from UNICEF, my colleague, a very big welcome to Juliana Lindsay. She is the head of office, the representative for UNICEF in Botswana, who will tell us about the challenges and remaining inequalities from a middle income perspective. This, folks, is your chance to welcome our panellists. Ladies and gentlemen, today the panellists are going to look at 3 broad blocks. They're going to look at the state of play. Where are we in education in low and middle income countries? They're going to look at the road to change. They're going to analyse what actually needs to be done, and they're going to make concrete suggestions on the way forward. Because at the end of the day, we need recommendations. We need solutions. We have a problem, folks, very clearly spelled out most recently by the World Bank's Learning to Realise Education's Promise report that spoke of a learning crisis across the world. After many years of schooling, millions and millions of children around the world don't have the most basics when it comes to language, when it comes to maths, when it comes to writing. This, of course, has led in turn to a somewhat maddening widening of social gaps for millions and millions of children. Folks, from the panelists today, when you walk outside, you're going to hear a lot of numbers, millions and millions, hundreds of millions. I think it's very important to always remember that every one of those numbers wears a human face. And so very, very frequently, that is the face of a child. And there is nothing more satisfying than seeing the face of a child when they go to school for the first time. There's also very few things sadder than seeing the face of a mother who's unable to get her child into a classroom. Ladies and gents, that means this discussion today could not be more timely. If the children and youth of today, who will be entering the labour force in around a decade, if they can be skilled, dynamic, and given the entrepreneurial skills and fully employed, the world will reap a reward like few we have seen. But the opposite is also true. Without these preconditions, without this education, any demographic boom that we will see, no matter what, could turn into a demographic disaster. Mass scarcity, unemployment, and dire implications for stability and security. That also wears a face. So, panelists, no pressure. Let's do this. All right, let's take a look at the state of play to begin with. Have classrooms harnessed the power for children around the world in lower and middle income countries? Okay, let us begin on our far left. Now, Miss Akosia Prepa, you're a young African female, one of the EDD leaders. Tell us about your experience in school and tell us about what you've seen on the state of education across the continent.
Visualize with me. Hello? Visualize with me. You're a father in the Difa region in Niger. You have no cattle to produce milk. Someone is willing to offer you this cattle, but only if you give him your daughter in marriage. On the other hand, you have somebody talking about education and the importance of education. However, you are going to get that milk 11 years from now. You need that milk now. Sanitary pads. Girls miss 6 to 7 days of school every month due to their periods. When this happens, they do not go to school. The issue is sanitary pads are super expensive in Ghana. The government of Ghana charges 20% tax on sanitary pads. When this happens, girls from rural areas and those from poor homes can no longer go to school. Gender imbalance. Most girls from rural Ghana are overburdened with household work. Some of them work 3 hours to fetch water every single day. On top of this, they cook, they clean, they take care of the house. These are the same girls who miss 6 to 7 days of school every month. Due to frustration of missing so many days, they leave school, and the consequences of that is teenage pregnancy and STDs. Infrastructure. In the 21st century, we still have students who sit under trees to study. Infrastructural amenities in rural Ghana is extremely poor. Students defecate in open places, exposing them to waterborne diseases. Lack of ICT labs, lack of libraries. At the end of the day, the funny thing is, a student from rural Ghana is expected to write an examination on a computer he has never seen before. In Boyobo, eastern Uganda, students walk barefoot to school every day, exposing their feet to jiggers. Now, when the roads turn to rivers of mud during the rainy season, they can no longer go to school, missing more days. They have to write the same examination as other students in the urban areas. This is the current situation of many young girls and most students in Africa. From somebody from Ghana, I live this experience. Most young people still do live this experience. Agenda 2030 is so far. We need an agenda now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Secretary. We've set the tone for a good, impassioned debate. Now, Romania, as an EU member state, has clearly made leaps and bounds in the last couple of decades when it comes to education. What were some of the key factors that have led to the positive change?
Well, good afternoon, first of all. And before I start, I want to thank everybody for being present here. Thank you and UNICEF for organizing together with Romania during our EU Council presidency this important panel with an important debate with one of our overarching priorities during EU Council presidency, and that is youth and and of course the education and inequalities in education. As well, I would like to thank Tatkushia for sharing with us her experiences, making us understand more the effects of lack of education and how improper access to education has around the globe. Going back to your question, Romania, and as part of European Union and European Union as a whole, I cannot say that we do not face challenges, but in terms of inequalities, in terms of inclusive education, equitable, and we are getting, let's say, better in order to find the right solutions for a better future for children. And I would mention the fact that everything starts with the preschool. In terms of preschool, Romania is doing, let's say, quite improving this sector, taking into account that we have levels of participation of 91%. The problem comes when we talk about area of anti-preschool education, where here we have only 6% of children to attend. Secondly, for success, we also have to invest, as it was said earlier, more in quality of education that is delivered in school by investing in teachers, investing in teaching methods, improving the curricula, as well investing also in and teaching the parents to stimulate and to involve themselves into the process of education of the children. Last but not least, to address the inequalities and inequities, we also have to ensure that no child is left behind and design also flexible mechanisms. There is no solution which fits for everybody. So that's why I think we have to go into concrete let's say problems so that we could find the appropriate solutions for that. I want to mention also the part regarding inclusion, which is not only about making sure that all of them have education, but it's also about the investment of all the stakeholders. If we talk about the private sector, if we talk about family, if we talk about government, all have to be involved in bottom-up grassroots work routes. As we have already seen the problem of inclusion. It's quite relevant in the European Union, and that is why, because we have to take into account the numbers just mentioned, that being also a reason, these numbers should be a reason for us to focus more on the inclusion of education, and without policies to prioritize the inclusion, we cannot speak about reducing inequalities in education and indeed in the wider society and the future society that it's created for actually the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Satyarthi, several years ago was in India, and I think probably talking to one of your colleagues, I was doing a television interview with a Professor Shanta Sinha, who's a child rights activist in India, and it was one of those interviews. It was good, but then suddenly off camera with my my producer, Ricardo Perez, I heard her say probably the best thing that she said in the whole interview, which of course we didn't get. And what she said was, there is no longer an argument as to whether children should be in school or not. That debate is closed. I agree. And yet, as you know, we see millions and millions of children around the world who are denied this right to education. What do you still see as the push and pull factors that are causing this?
Thank you, and thanks for leadership of Romania in this important role. I will tell through my experience, while freeing not 1, 2, or 100, or 500, or 5,000, but 88,000 children from slavery and child labor and bringing them back to schools in India during last 40 years, I could experience that the pull factors include greediness of employers, failure of legal enforcement, laws and policy. Also, children being the cheapest source of labor. It's very unfortunate but questionable that when world has more than 200 million jobless adults, why we need 152 million children to work in full-time jobs at the cost of their education. So if the child labor continues, then the denial of education is the obvious result. So this is one another pull factor. Then we have child marriages, we have social evils and complacency, we have traditions and customs in the countries which do not regard and respect the dignity and anyway, okay, it came back. So then the pull factors include acute poverty, ignorance, illiteracy among communities and parents. That also includes the failure of social protection measures and programs at local level and country level. Sometimes the corruption is also a push factor. Lack of adequate schools. Accessibility to education is still problems in a number of countries, and even if schools are there, they are not totally free. The fees is still charged in many countries where those who claim that education has been made free. So that is another push factor. We don't have adequate number of trained teachers, so that again creates problems. So combination of these factors work in such a way. And I come across those children, Madam Minister, who produce clothes which we wear. And the child asked that each time when I was making this cloth, I tried to dream. I could not dream completely that my mother, my sister can ever wear that cloth. I come across many children in the remotest parts of Ivory Coast and Ghana. This morning I'm coming from Ghana, where the children are producing cocoa beans in the cocoa fields at the cost of their education, definitely, but health and freedom and childhood. And I met and asked them, how do you like chocolate? And the children answered, what is chocolate? They had never seen chocolate, they have never eaten chocolate in the remote areas in Ghana. The children stitch footballs in India and Pakistan, but they had no dream to play with those footballs. So children are not the priority in the society, and I'm very sorry to say that children are not yet the political priority in the world. Children are not yet the political priority in the world. World is not so poor. I refuse to accept that the laws and constitutions in the world cannot protect our children. I refuse to accept that the world is so poor that cannot bring all the children to schools. We have made so much advancement in the world, but look at 152 million children are toiling today when we are talking about them. 260 million children, 63 million children have to be in school, but they are not, as we know. What is needed? $22 billion additional money to ensure education in primary schools. Altogether, 40 billion additional money to ensure education in primary and secondary both. What is this $22 billion? 4.5 days of global military expenditure. 1/5 of what the Americans spent on tobacco. This is not a big deal. Children are not still our priority, and I'm thankful to your leadership and the Commission and all of us, UNICEF and civil society, unions, everybody, who are talking, working, but that requires bigger push. So when we are talking of push and pull factor, we have to pull the children from slavery and trafficking, and we have to push this speed. There are companies like Orange, but there are many more, I think, from the corporate sector. They have to play a very important role in it. They have to show the leadership in ending slavery and trafficking and child labor so that the children can ensure their school. I'm not talking about philanthropy. I am talking about the corporate social responsibility, moral responsibility. I would also urge, using this platform and the presence of all of you, what recently Dutch government has done. They have passed a law to make the mandatory due diligence in procurement of the goods and supply chain of the Dutch companies. A similar law is in pipeline in Germany. So my urge would be to you, the Minister, that European Union should have such a law to ensure that no child, no slave, no forced person, no traffic victim is involved in the supply chain of any products which come to this part of the land or go anywhere. That will help in changing the situation.
Ladies and gentlemen, for very obvious reasons, Nobel Prize winners get a few more minutes. Right, to Ms. Lindsay, based on the compelling stories we've just heard, and of course, as UNICEF Head of Office here in Botswana, do any of these messages or lessons apply in a middle-income setting? And what would be some of the driving factors to, as Mr. Satyadi said, to push quality education?
Thank you. I'm not a Nobel Prize winner, so I will try to stick to my three. They absolutely apply in a middle-income country, perhaps in a different context a bit, but they do apply. One of the key things that governments need to do, one of the key drivers, is allocating enough money to the education budget of the country, but then making sure that it is spent in the right ways and the right places. Many of us know that inequality is a major issue in middle-income countries. And if all of the money goes to the schools in the cities and not to the far-off districts, then the children in the far-off areas are not going to be able to benefit. So the first area is not just amount of money, but it needs to be allocated well so that no one is left behind. The second is focusing on early childhood development. Much of the science recently shows that the brain of a child is developed in the first months to 2 to 3 years of life. However, low to middle income countries spend less than 1% of their education budgets on early childhood development. In Botswana, it's about 2%, but still not nearly enough. So we need to focus on early childhood development because that brain development in the early years makes a major contribution to the child's ability to read, to write, to do their maths later on in life. And finally, you know, that the topic is the potential of a classroom. But as Akasua demonstrated, there's so much more to a child's learning than what happens in the classroom. The teacher has to care about the children, and for better or worse, like it or not, has to follow up if the children aren't doing well. The head teacher, the principal of the school, that person is essentially the CEO of a small company. And we don't expect a company to be successful if the CEO is not an excellent leader. So we therefore have to put effort into training the principals and the head teachers about leadership, so that they can set the vision and they can lead their teachers and the other staff in the schools to make sure that the children can learn as much as possible. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Lucas, You've lived through so much of this. Can you try and remember and share one of your first memories of growing up as a kid in a Nairobi slum? When and where did you sense that this experience just wasn't quite right?
So maybe I'll start by saying, as I was growing up in Mathare, a slum in Nairobi with a population of 500,000 people in a small crowded place, I didn't know that we were experiencing poverty. So I thought this was the normal for everyone across the world. But when I started going to school, I started seeing that people are having a better life, people are having water, people are having better toilets, people are getting books. Then I started seeing the inequality in it. But also in school, there was still inequality in the education system. The education system was focused on the fast learners. And not to say that the rest were not fast learners, but if you look at the factors that were coming into play, you are going to school without food, you don't have the right uniform, you can't be a fast learner. Education cannot be your priority. So the teachers there just focused on the fast learners. So I was privileged enough because I had a lot of
That's it.
Okay.
So I can say I was privileged enough because I had a lot of support from friends, well-wishers who were supporting my education, so I could concentrate. So I was among the few people that the teachers concentrated on, leaving out the rest. So the rest mostly consisting of girls, orphans, so the education system was not just working for them. So from where I come from in my class, so this is a class of 50 students, only 10 of us made it to secondary school. The rest of them dropped on the way. Then when it was time to transition to university again, only 2 of us transitioned to university. So this is a group of 50. You can imagine in a group of 50, if only 2 can make it to the university. Then now we left the university. Only me, I'm now a youth advocate with UNICEF. The other one is still struggling with unemployment. So these are the struggles that most of young people are going through back in Mathare, where I come from. And now as a youth advocate with UNICEF, I'm trying to talk to government, NGOs. We need to make education to be a right, not a privilege. So everyone needs access to education. You don't get education as a privilege, but we need to make education a right for all, despite where you are born or where you are living. So,
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Okay, the last panelist for this first question,
great.
Mr. Ivito. Good time to get something, a sense from the private sector. Given the scenario that you've clearly aware of and you've heard reiterated today, do you think young people are acquiring the right skills to make them employable, to help them enter the job market in the coming few years?
Well, Orange is an international group. We are present in 28 countries in the world and in 19 countries in Africa and Middle East. We do interact in the sphere of youth and education in different ways. First, for example, in Africa, we do employ 18,000 people in the 19 countries where we are present. So we do have a lot of work to have the right recruitment for the different skills that are needed for the company. Then we do, as a service company, have a very big impact in most of the countries where we are present in indirect jobs, indirect employment, in distribution channels, among the suppliers and many others. And the ratio is 1 to 10 or 20 indirect employees that we can create indirectly. And then after, that's our clients and the young clients, which are very fond of telecommunication. And we see that the digital skills is a key element to reach to employment. And what we see is that in Africa, for example, there is a very big turnover. people are very keen to learn new skills, are very ready, very interested to be welcomed at our skill centers, for example, when we open new ones in different countries. Yeah, we see also. Yeah, that's better. We see also that among the young population, even among the graduates, there is a very high level of unemployment in countries like Tunisia, like Ivory Coast. You reach unemployment rate of more than 30%, even among the university graduates. So there is a key issue of employable skills among these young people, and we would like to contribute to give this possibility to increase the employability of their competencies in the years to come.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, folks. A very quick wrap-up of our first of three sections, and thank you. I think we've... Interesting, you always have technical glitches, particularly with communication, but in a space like this, you're somehow assuming it'll be perfect. But anyway,
the subject.
Thank you, firstly, from the reality check and inspiration from Mr. Riambo and Ms. Pepra, I think, to Mr. Satyati, giving us a very clear sense of what we would call the pull. I'm assuming they are, okay. To the very clear factors, the things that it's hard to quite imagine what that looks like to a child. The child labour, child marriage, a lack of trained teachers was a very good point. And of course, this dark irony that so many of these children who are in child labour don't need the football and don't eat the chocolate. To Ms. Lindsay's clear point on it's about funding, but it's about smart allocation of funding. And it's hard to think of a better place to put your money than our youngest citizens in ECD. And to, of course, Mr. Yvetot, to bring in that sense that from his experience and Orange's experiences, there is no questioning the willingness to learn of young people around, if we're talking the African continent or Asia. But the question is, are the services there? Is the training there? And there's no doubt as to why there is that willingness. I think it was the late, great Kofi Annan who said, education is power, education is liberating, education is the premise of progress of every single family. Okay, folks, we move now to our second area, which is the road to change. How do we go from what everyone is speaking about to a better place for the hundreds of millions of young people for whom we're speaking on their behalf? We're going to look at enablers, we're going to look at some answers, we're going to look at what needs to be done to improve quality education. But first, and here is your moment, get your app out, get your phone. We're going to do just one quiz. If you've got that EDD app downloaded, have a look at it. If you're on an Android, somewhere in the top right there is a More button. If you're on an Apple, an iPhone, bottom right you'll see More. Okay? I don't see a lot of confusion. I'm going with More. Click on that. Scroll down, you will see interactivity and voting. Yeah, a couple of nods. Internet of Good Things, tech people, they nod. Okay, go to voting, and of course we are in A3. Okay, and then so we'll have a look at the question first, and then when I tell you it's the moment to go, you have 10 seconds. All right, so we're going back to the World Bank, because they've got good, hard numbers. So 1 billion young people will enter the job market in the next decade. That much we know. Here's our question. How many of them will not find a job? 250 million, 500 million, or even more, 600 million. Okay, so ladies and gents, you now have 10 seconds to vote. A, B, or C, please. Voila. And the answer is... Okay, well done. So the answer is... That's a good level of response. And I do wish those 17.9% of you were right. Unfortunately, the answer is yes, 600 million. Hard to encapsulate. We did warn you we were going to hear a lot of numbers. But yes, the global economy needs to create 5 million jobs each and every month to keep pace with youth employment rates. Okay, so by the end of this panel, we're hoping the global economy has created 10,000 new jobs. Surely, hand in hand with climate change, reversing, rectifying this youth employment crisis is the pressing global issue of our time. And just like global warming, the socio-economic cost, the cost to society of inaction is terrifyingly high, which leads us to our next segment. Okay, let's start with the man who ended, Mr. Ivito. These statistics, of course, they scream out to the private sector. What is the private sector's role when it comes to preparing, let's give you a whole billion, when it comes to preparing these billion people entering the job market with the right skills?
Well, we do have had many initiatives locally through our affiliates, either from Orange Foundation, from CSR department, from Human Resources department, and we created with partners many programs. Recently, we did launch, for example, coding schools in several African countries, and we thought that it was very promising approach because we had a lot of response from the young population. But to go further and to scale up all these programs, we thought that we need to have it in a more comprehensive way, a comprehensive approach. And so we decided to have a full program on our African footprint, one on more on a CSR approach, which is linked to what we call tiers-lieux d'innovation in French, Digital Innovation Center in English, which aims at giving opportunities for young people to be trained in certain level of digital skills, either for mobile skills, programming, coding. This is one aspect, and we are launching coding schools in all our affiliates progressively this year and next year to come. Second, what we call Fab Lab Solidaire, which is a place where you can learn how to build things which are linked to electronics, and we equipped specific centers and invite dropouts children from the education programs to come from age 14 to 25 and to acquire in a certain number of months sufficient skills. And then after we try to build incubators and accelerators so that the young companies that will come out of this training can be supported and accompanied. This is one aspect. The second aspect on what we are looking at, somebody mentioned that there was a lack of teachers around the world and specifically maybe in India and in Africa. And we think that using digital technology can be of help. Of course, we can't do everything through digital technology. E-education is certainly very promising, but we need to mix that with classes, traditional classes, presential classes, so that the people, the young generation can be motivated to come and but also to give a solution to the lack of teachers around Africa. So we are launching with many partners a new programs using internet technology to support the training at very different levels of competencies, the training of students, but also of pupils in different countries in Africa.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Mr. Satyarthi, how do you see civil society contributing to the required shift in the mindset of politicians?
Well, civil society is the part of the rest of the society, of course, so they have all goods and bads. So it is not that they have come from the heaven and suddenly they can change the world. But I strongly feel that they can help in building mass awareness from bottom to top. They can be very strong, should be very strong, constructive, critical partners in the development and human rights areas. It would not be worthwhile all the time to criticize governments that governments have not done and put all the blames on the governments or businesses, but better to find a way that how we can build trust between these three major stakeholders and agencies: state, corporate, and civil society. So each one of them had to play that role to build mutual trust and respect, learn from each other, and find some common grounds to work together. So state, civil society, and corporate have to work. Thirdly, civil society had created good, replicable models of development on every field, including an education field or eradication of child labor. So that can be multiplied and used and appreciated. So they can play a very important role in many ways. But the most important thing is that we cannot, because when we talk of these kind of situations of child slavery, child marriages, child labor, or denial of education, it's a social evil, that kind of mindset. And social evil cannot be dealt only by the governments or by the rule of law. So civil society can play an important role in changing the mass scale mindset or complacency in the society, considering that this is an evil, the denial of child rights is an evil. They can also, and they are also already doing important role in mass mobilization to create political will, because the governments and politicians look for the popular demands and some sort of support, and that can be generated through creating popular demands for the rights of education, and particularly the issues which children are facing, slavery, trafficking, etc. So the mass mobilization will work. You mentioned that when I had this crazy idea to organize the worldwide march across 103 countries, and that has gone across 80,000 kilometers distance, which is double than the periphery of the earth. That has generated tremendous, awareness, but also a sense of urgency for children, and that resulted concretely in the unanimous adoption of an international convention, the ILO Convention 182 on the worst forms of child labor. That demand was originated by the children and civil society organizations, teachers' unions, and so on, and that has resulted. And since then, we have seen concrete results of decrease of child labor from 260 million in year 2000, to 152 million now. So there's this concrete thing. And also the number of out-of-school children through our collective efforts have also come down. As we know, in 2000, where the Dakar framework of action was adopted in the Dakar conference or Dakar forum, the number was about 130 million primary school age children out of school, and now that has gone to less than half, 63 million. So this is possible when we try to learn, but most important thing is to create a sense of emergency. A compelling reason to build partnerships. The participation of young people is also the key. At village level, at country level, international level, the mass mobilization, which is led by the young people and survivors and victims themselves, would also be a great idea, and we have experienced it. And I would, am I supposed to leave now in a few minutes?
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. Once these Nobel Committee people, there are 5 people sitting in the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, and they give you a medal, gold medal in the name of peace, and as we say, that they take away the peace for whole of your life. So you cannot sit and relax in one place, so that goes on like that. So maybe I have to beg a pardon and leave. But I would just appeal one thing, that the children have never been responsible for poverty. Never, ever in the history. Children have never created wars. They have not fought wars. Children are born as free human beings, but we have curtailed the adults, politicians, civil society workers, corporates, religious leaders, faith institutions have created all kinds of walls and barriers for our children. The children who are looking for a safer place tonight, 50 million children are looking for a safer place tonight because they are children on move due to global warming, due to conflicts and violence in their home countries. They have left. So, whose children are they, my question? Whose children are they? They are all our children. They are all our children. Dear friends, you have enormous power. Our leader is sitting here, the Romania, and all of you. Let us make sure that we should make this menace of illiteracy and acute poverty of children and child labor and trafficking a history as soon as possible. We can do it. We will do it. Thank you so much.
All right, let us all thank Mr. Satyarthi for his time and wisdom and wish you very safe travels, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, hey.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right, we continue to move. Madam Secretary of State, back to you. The all-key role of governments in looking at the employment crisis, in looking at equitable education, what are the key aspects you see, the key role of governments at this time?
Well, first of all, as weird as it would sound, the first mandatory thing is for the governments to have as the first priority education. And I said it might sound weird because all of them say that, yes, education is our priority, but we don't have to forget the fact that they are depending on an electoral cycle, which is for 5 years, and they actually get involved more often into projects which give an immediate result. And education, it is a long-term process that they have to engage. So again, I'm underlying the first thing, it should be priority 0 for each government, education. Secondly, they should adapt their strategies and policies, first of all, to the future jobs, to the future challenges of the society. And I would mention here, for example, strategies in terms of education. I would mention climate change or disruptive technologies, artificial intelligence, because if we have a strategy, a long-term strategy, taking these future challenges into account and adapting the curricula according to the future challenges, maybe we wouldn't be in the situation to see today that a lot of the high rate of unemployment between the youth, and maybe we will prepare them better for the challenges that appear. So another thing that should be, actually I would give an example from the Romanian perspective, the quality of education, but also assuring that we create the right environment, equal environment for everybody, whether you speak about education in the cities or in the rural part of the countries. We have to take care and assure that we have the right projects in order to assure equal education. For example, in Romania, we created a couple of programs that address the challenges in terms of Roman descent or children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And here we have the second chance or think twice, meaning the children or the youth which dropped school, and we try to bring them back, offering them the environment necessary and helping them to understand how important is for education for their future. Another project is school after school, because sometimes maybe we don't like what we see, but helping them after school, we are making them making the educational process much easier. Well, another thing which I would like to, I mentioned earlier about the necessity to have a flexibility, some kind of flexibility in the educational curricula, because I don't think that I'm saying, or you will be surprised, and I'm sure you will agree with me, that we've seen many cases of youth getting out of universities but not knowing actually too many things to do. They know theory, but not so much practice. So this flexibility, offering them those so necessary soft skills which they need in terms of labor, would be another key issue that policies and governmental strategies should take into account. So I would stop here, even if there are many other things that the governments could do. But, well, for now.
Thank you very much. There are indeed. Very good summation. Ms. Pepera, let's just look at your experiences in your home communities. Any positive examples of where you've been able to change the mindset of communities or families in terms of the importance of education?
Yes. So I initially discussed the factors contributing to education inequalities. So how do we change this narrative? First, we educate the parents and community leaders. We make sure we have workshops for them so they know the importance of education, the long-term impact of education, eradicating poverty, economic growth, provision of jobs to increase crime activities in their countries, and also in their districts. We also make sure they understand the consequences of choosing milk over their daughters. This means that we hold workshops where we bring parents, we bring teachers, we bring community leaders on how to effectively impact change in their communities. Most of the time, the reason why parents choose milk over their daughters is because they do not have money. So as an NGO, as a founder of an NGO, what I do is to bring all these people together and ask them, how can we help you? I am the founder of a Mankudim Foundation in Ghana, in the northern part of Ghana, and this is what I do. We work to provide sanitary pads to the to the girls in the rural areas, and we also hold workshops for the parents so they can be agents of change and know the impacts of education. Once this happens, they are able to hold the government accountable in delivering quality education to their communities. They are also able to hold the government accountable to reduce ridiculous taxes on sanitary pads. So this is how we work together with the community and parents to change their ideas, to make them see the long-term impacts of education in their society.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you very much. And the last one, Ms. Lindsay, I'm aware of this UNICEF-led partnership called Generation Unlimited, looking at the youth of today with its focus on quality secondary education and entrepreneurial skills and empowerment. How can the continent, the African continent, ensure that it is prepared in terms of policies and resources to help young people on this transition from schooling into the workplace?
It's a good question. There are two things I would mention. One is structural within governments and ministries of education, and that is adjusting the curriculum and the way of teaching so that it's not just memorization and rote learning, but so that children are challenged to analyze things, to question, to try to figure things out, etc. I realize this is easier said than done, particularly because in many places children normally are not encouraged to question and to challenge their elders. And we want to maintain a sense of respect, of course, for the elders. But nonetheless, if children are going to solve problems for themselves, and also for their countries when they're older, they need to be stimulated to be able to figure things out for themselves. And one way, and this leads me to the second possibility, which is more societal, one way to do that is by recognizing that there's simply not going to be enough jobs in the sense of getting a salary at the end of the month to accommodate the children coming into the workforce. In Botswana, there are 20,000 graduates every year from university. 20,000. There are 2,000 new jobs created every year, with a small population of 2 million people. So essentially what that means is that if people want to work and earn money, then they're not going to necessarily go to an office and get a paycheck at the end of the day in all situations. They're going to need to become entrepreneurial, as many already have. They need, in many cases, encouragement and training on how to run a small business so that they don't get taken advantage of. And in some cases, in countries where the government has provided many jobs through the civil service, encouragement to see that actually running your own business is something to aspire to. Not something, in Botswana, it's kind of seen as, oh, well, if nothing else works, you can be an entrepreneur. But actually, that's something to aspire to. You have more control over your own situation. You can be creative. You can create more jobs for other young people, actually, if you have a successful business that can employ others. So I think it's a combination of adjusting the curriculum and encouraging young people and helping them to get entrepreneurial skills.
Terrific. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Juliana. Okay, look, you all heard it, folks. A quick wrap-up, I think, of some of the insight from our panelists. Obviously, education requires a very quick scale-up. Training is key. This idea of going digital, but also going digital with teachers, I think makes a lot of sense. Whether, at the end of the day, if we need 10 million, 6 million new teachers in the next 10 years, chances of that happening, even building teachers colleges, are quite remote. If you take retired teachers from France, from India, from Romania, America, Kenya or Ghana, and get them to do curriculums and get that in a classroom, then you have quality learning. Trust between stakeholders, a clear sense of urgency from everyone. The very nice point from our now absent Nobel laureate on children don't create poverty, they're not the masters of that destiny. And as Ms. Pepper said, listen, let's ensure people are listening to communities. Okay, last section, and then questions from you all. This is really business time. This is where our panelists all pay for their lunch or their dinner or both. This is where we start hearing some solutions and some recommendations. Each person, one or two main points. Let's start, Lucas, with you. The way forward based on what we've spoken on today.
So maybe just one way forward. I would like to ask the policy maker to heavily invest in teacher training. We want teachers in classes who don't just teach us how to pass exams, but how to be better people in life, how to be entrepreneurs. So teacher training will be one of my main recommendations. Then infrastructure. We want the right type of schools. Schools with electricity, enough desks, blackboard, chalk, so that when you go to school, it doesn't feel like it's a punishment. Because we're already going through a lot at home, so when you go to school, you need to feel like maybe this is a safe haven for you. You need to be here. So infrastructure in school. And lastly, also focus on locally generated solution. The people have their problems, and I think they can also be part of the solution. So we don't want a situation where solutions are imported from other places and being enforced on people. So it can be participation of the local people to give their inputs in the solutions that we come with. So those will be my recommendations.
Excellent.
Okay, good. I think we've started this part on a very good note. Madam Secretary of State.
Well,
That was great.
I go back a little bit. I said that one of the main issues is that the government should prioritize education, but also adopt their strategies and policies for future challenges. And I mentioned disruptive technologies. Romania has a national strategy that, in order to create a digital agenda, so this digital agenda definitely includes also a chapter specific for education. I think that we need to be aware that prioritizing digital literacy is and should be one of our priorities. And for us, the focus is placed on including ITC competences as a mandatory part, starting from the early ages and preschool curricula. As well, many current careers will require increasing levels of digital skills, while new jobs, as I said also earlier, may be created for which digital skills and literacies should be the key. So, in the end, I guess that from my point of view, at least, this would be the main issue. Addressing the future challenges, adopting the curricula, and of course, out of this curricula, the digital literacy shouldn't be definitely missed.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Ivito.
Yes, well, a few words. The key word, if we want to select one or two words, the first key word would be partnership. We think that really, if we used to have our Orange learning system, but what we want to do now is to open it to partnerships and to promote the same type of curricula to our environment, companies and society. And so we think that partnerships between public entities, private entities, civil societies is a key element to build flexible solutions very adapted to the context. Another keyword will be also decentralized solutions. For example, in Tunisia, we have been working on these issues the last 8 years. And we started, of course, in Tunis, but very soon we thought that we needed to have partnerships with local universities in each regional entity of Tunisia, and to build solutions adapted to their environment. And I think that the same for the other countries where we are present in Africa.
Here, we would love to see that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Lindsay.
Thank you. Two things I would mention. The first is back to early childhood development. We can't assume that education is just primary school and secondary school, because in many cases, the success of the children when they're teenagers in secondary school actually depends in part on whether they had good nutrition when they were 2 years old. It depends on whether they went to preschool when they were 3 years old. It depends on whether they had love and care from their parents when they were 4 years old. So we have to make sure that we focus on early childhood development as well as part of this whole continuum. The second point, I actually want to come back to something very critical that Lucas said, which was that teachers need to learn how to serve not just the top achievers, but the children who are also at the bottom. The children who have great potential if the teacher recognizes that they're not doing well and has the space and the time and the ability to come to that child and give the child the extra help that they need, whether in that classroom or separately. Because that's the way that these children who aren't doing well, maybe in 3rd grade, can be brought up to the level of the other children and continue to succeed. It's a great way to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Juliana. And let's end this session on how we started the first. Ms. Pepra.
So we've had all the factors that contribute to education inequalities. We've listened to the narratives. How do we work together collectively to leave no child behind? Government. I want to see policies on how to restructure our teacher training and curriculum. Teachers must be trained beyond the curriculum. They must be trained on the SDGs to understand issues like sexual health, reproductive rights, mental health, how to deal with students with disabilities, because teachers are not just teaching in the classroom, they have to be agents of change too in our communities. There also should be funding policies and funding made available so schools across the country have equal access to infrastructure. I'm talking about ICT labs, libraries, classroom filled with blackboards so that students can go, as Lucas said, to be happy. Private sector. I want to see you form more partnership with local NGOs. This way you can help provide vocational trainings to parents, because once the parents are sustained economically, their children will be free. Girls can go to school and have a safe environment. EU, thank you so much. You're giving more funding to the African continent. However, there is still more you have to do. There are certain countries, I can talk about Niger, that is left behind. These orphan countries and orphan districts need funding. If we are working to leave no one behind, we have to reach everybody. So we have to re-strategize on how to reach countries, irrespective of if either it is war-torn zone, if it's political instability. We have to make sure that funding gets to them, because we are leaving no one behind. Citizens, you have to hold your government accountable. You pay the taxes. Whatever the government does, you have to hold them accountable. You have to make sure they see the impacts of their policies, negative and positive. Together, we can work to end education inequality. Together, we can help end education inequality. Agenda 2030 is too far. So if you are all on with me to end education inequalities, by the count of 3, I want you to all say, agenda now. 1, 2, 3. Agenda now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic, and thank you. All right, we're getting lots of questions, so I do want to jump there, but first we have a very special guest in the audience as well, Monsignor Bruno Duff from the Vatican Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, who's going to share a couple of minutes of thoughts and reflections from what he's heard today. Monsignor.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for all this reflection about education and about the way to develop education. I'm the Secretary of the Dicastery in the Vatican for promoting integral human development, and we try in this service to emphasize and to support many initiatives in education, local education, meeting people and considering first the needs and also the capacities, the possibilities of each community. We, as said the Pope Francis, we need to meet one another, to listen, children, and also parents and communities, local communities. And we discovered that many people, many actors in these communities can teach and can accompany and can support the children in the communities. We have many teachers in our world. We have many persons who have a very great experience, a memory, a capacity to educate, because to educate first is to lead, to open capacities, to open ways for the children. It's clear that we cannot think development without education. We could say that the first dimension of development, human development, integral development, is to develop education. And we discovered, listening to you, that we are all actors of education in the health, in the university, in the schools, as an actor in politics, and economical actors. All we are actors, and also all the association, international organization, and religions. So I think that the religions can be actors of education. And we had a conference in Roma 2 months ago to try to support a dialogue between religions about SDGs and about education to the development and to human rights. I think that it's very important to begin listening and considering the needs, the human needs and the human hope of many persons, and especially suffering people in economical situation and context, and in suffering in context of violence. And what I most understood listening to you is that the first question in this debate about inequality and education is the question to access, the right to access, the right of the children and the right of women, girls, women, and the right of all the community to have an access to education, to have an access to health, to have an access to culture, to have an access to employment, to participate to the economic activity. Because when you learn many things, and we can learn, we can discover many knowledges, but it's more important to discover that you can participate to the economical activity. I was in Ethiopia a few months ago, and I had the time in the street one night with young people. And young people said to me, you know, it's clear that our country is developing. And many companies from China, for example, are building our country. But without us, we have no activity in this economy. So we want to participate, we want to be actors in our history and in our community and the future of our country. The question of access is the most important question. So we, on the political level, we have to clarify our choices, our educational choices. What do we want? Not for the future, but now, because the question of future are question now. And the question of education is really the question to prepare, as we understood with the testimony. We understand that today is the great challenge for tomorrow. And we could say that, I think, in the context, the actual context, we have a paradoxal context. We have many means, we have many knowledges, we have many possibilities to open the minds of children, and at the same time, I had the information from UNESCO, more than 600 million children and adolescents cannot really read and count today. So it's the same. It's interesting because it's the same number of the statistic about the impossibility for the young people to have an employment. So we can realize this connection. In our tradition, Christian tradition, we often say that we have 4 principles to support new ways for development and to reduce inequality, the first principle is the human dignity of each child, of each person. Human dignity is for all our initiatives to consider the integrity and the memory and the hope of each person, and never reduce a person to be an instrument to be used for profit, for abuse, for power. It's impossible to continue that. That's the first principle, dignity. The second principle is responsibility. We are all in this responsibility, and we can teach responsibility also, because each one can be responsible of the development of his community, of our world. And the third one is the principle of solidarity. And solidarity is that solidarity between generations, between countries, between continents, but solidarity is to say that I need you, and perhaps you need me. But this solidarity, this consideration, mutual hospitality and mutual consideration, appears as the role and the most important moral roles in this question of education and development. And I thank you so much for all that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monsignor. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we want to get some questions. Thank you so much, Monsignor. Thank you, everyone here. Thank you, those people watching online. You heard it very clearly what needs to be done. Early childhood development is key. Access and quality are fundamental. Partnerships, we go nowhere if we don't go together. Teacher training, digital literacy, educate girls. The economic impact is overwhelming. We know this is both morally right. We know it's good economics. There was a world leader who not long ago said that cutting budget deficits in education is a little like making an overloaded plane lighter by removing its engine. At first it may feel like you're flying high, but it won't take long until you feel the impact. So let's not forget, folks, the impact of what everyone's talked about today. The impact, yes, it's on the economy, yes, it's on employability, yes, it's on ending tolerance, on ending poverty, but it's also very much about building tolerance. With education comes caring, with education comes confidence, with education comes civic responsibility. As we heard from our two young leaders today, education lights a fire. Look no further than those two people. It is, dare I say, the magic bullet. Now with that, we go to a couple of questions, but first, please join me in thanking very much our panelists for a great conversation. All right. Okay, Lucas, question to you from Maria, wherever Maria is. Thank you, Maria. What was the one thing that helped you most in overcoming the challenges you had at school? One or two main things that helped you overcome challenges.
So I can say the first thing is I just wanted to get out of the slum life, because I'd been exposed to another life. So just that is what motivated me. I just wanted to get out of the slum. But later on, I realized it was not just getting out of the slum, but it was about helping others also to not just get out, but make that place better for us, even if it means we have to stay there. So that really motivated me.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, a very popular one, anonymous, to Mr. Yvetot. How can private companies like Orange use technology, particularly mobile technology? How can Orange use mobile technology to increase access to education?
Well, we have had originally a first program to develop the training of teachers in remote areas in Madagascar, and using mobile technology with a very specific curricula that has been defined with Ministry of Education in this country. So this is a first example to train teachers and to increase the number and the preparation of the teachers for the new curricula. Then to create on-spot schools that are connected two sources of education, and this is all the question linked with the increase and the enlargement of coverage of internet access in the various countries where we are present. I think that there is a great effort that has been done by all the telecommunication operators, and I'm sure that before the year 2025 we will have a very large coverage, even in rural areas for the whole continent of Africa. Then after, to provide, as I said, through partnerships with various type of providers of education content, to give the means so that this access is affordable, which is a key point, and it can be free, of course, for a certain level, and at most affordable on the content side, but also on the internet access side. And this is something on which we are working to diminish the costs of this type of access to education content linked with capacity, telecommunication capacity access.
Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, I'm being given all sorts of hand signals, so I'm going to go with two more questions, if I may. Juliana, Ms. Lindsay, and then Ms. Prepar. Okay, Ms. Lindsay, one from Godfrey. Do you think a multi-sectoral approach is needed, is the key to reduce inequalities in the field of education?
It absolutely is. Whoever brought it up is very perceptive. You'll notice the challenge or the solution is not just in the classroom. It's not just a teacher. From the things that were mentioned earlier, it's social. It's helping the children make sure that there's less poverty in the home so that the family has an incentive to send them to school and not keep them at home. It's health-wise in terms of menstrual care, in terms of STDs, et cetera. It's infrastructure in terms of having decent roads to get to school, for example. So it crosses all of these different areas. If a poor Ministry of Education is trying to solve it alone, they're not going to succeed. It needs a whole of government approach.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, folks, last one. We're going to, you know where we're heading, don't you, Ms. Prepar? To you. It's a great question, actually. It's very simple. And it is based on everything you've heard, based on everything you've seen, based on everything you've experienced, based on the challenges. Are you positive or are you negative?
I am positive. I mean, Ghana recently launched free education for senior high schools. But free does not necessarily mean quality. I do know we will get there. As I said, if everybody does their part, we will get there. I am positive, but then it will take a lot of work. So I'm positive.
On that note, everyone, back to work. Thank you very much.